for the next 2 years. Okay, Town clerk, correct.
Will the Senate please come to order?
But I got it.
Good afternoon. Today's devotional exercises will be conducted by Reverend Tom Hardy of the United Congregational Church of Bethel. Welcome back.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So you know how when you get off the phone with the 14th constituent in the evening and you've been nodding and shaking your head, you kind of go, let out that big sigh? That big sigh is really the epitome of having faith and hope. Faith that after you let out all that air, that you're going to get some back in. And the hope that after nodding and listening and nodding, that you maybe accomplish something. And today I had one of those moments where there was a tiny bit of hope for spring that shot through me when I heard a red-winged blackbird. And you know, you look for the hope in all the little places, and as a funeral director, I'm always looking for it because we're dealing with the bad stuff. So I wanted to, it brought to mind when I heard that redwing, a poem by Emily Dickinson that I wanted to reacquaint some of you with perhaps. It's "Hope is the thing with feathers." And she said this, she said, "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me." Hope doesn't ask us for a thing except to trust. So I have trust, and it is my prayer that you achieve your hopes and your dreams for this session and for the state of Vermont. Thank you.
Are there any announcements? Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a quick announcement with regard to my colleague from Chittenden Southeast, Senator Rom Hinsdale. As many of you may have heard, she is resting comfortably in the UVM Medical Center. Her doctors say that she's fine, but she needs to remain there and remain stable for a couple of weeks on her doctor's advice. And so for that reason, we wish her well. And number two, S-100 and S-102 bills that Senator Rom Hinsdale was going to be reporting, we will be holding off on today for one day. And we have changed up the reporting lineup with the committee. So they're going to take these 24 hours to prepare their reports, and we'll pick up those bills tomorrow. And again, we wish the senator all the best. Thank you.
And just in case the senator from Chittenden Central is unaware, the senator is with us
There we go.
remotely. Or was. Oh, there she is. We wish you the best. Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, we have a number of House bills for reference. Today we have H66, introduced by Representative Kornheiser and others. Please listen to the reading of the bill by title only.
H66, an act relating to paid family and medical leave insurance.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. We have H126, introduced by Representative Sheldon and many others. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H126, an act relating to community resilience and biodiversity protection.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy. We have H127, introduced by Representative Byrong and others. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H127, an act relating to sports wagering.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bills referred to Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. We have H157, introduced by Representatives Bloomley and Stevens. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H157, an act relating to the Vermont Basic Needs Budget.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. We have H165, introduced by Representative Brady and others. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H165, an act relating to school food programs and universal school meals.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Education. We have H481, introduced by the Committee on Healthcare. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H481, an act relating to public health initiatives to address death by suicide.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Health and Welfare. We have H482, introduced by the Committee on Government Operations and Military Affairs. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H482, an act relating to Vermont Criminal Justice Council recommendations for law enforcement officer training.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Government Operations. I will enter the orders of the day. It's my understanding we'll be passing over S60 and we'll be taking up S89. S89 was read a first time and reported to the Committee on Judiciary, which reports that when amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S89, an act relating to establishing a forensic facility.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill, and for the report from the Committee on Judiciary, the Senator from Bennington, Senator Sears.
I was looking for my witness list, Mr. President. As well as my report on the bill. You could give me just a second. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. S89 and its companion bill S91, which will be up next, are two bills associated with the issue of competency, insanity, and forensic facilities. A lot of what happened was in S3 last year. It was a bill designed to have a discussion about whether or not Vermont should have a forensic facility, among other things, also dealing with insanity and competency. And S3 did a number of positive steps forward in the mental health, treating mental health, and those who have committed crimes due to the mental health issues. But the committee that was appointed to study the issue of forensic facility failed to come to any agreement. So they basically punted. And a number of us, including the Chair of Health and Welfare and our President Pro Tem, and the Justice Oversight Committee believed that Vermont needed a forensic facility. And we began to work on the bill last fall, and S89 is what's in front of us. And I might add, to go through this, one of the things that we wanted to do was to make sure that only those who were very serious offenders who needed protection from themselves or others would be eligible for a forensic facility. And so you'll see as I walk through the bill, several areas there. And I want to be clear about that. We had a murder in Bennington where a person slit the throat of another person, and she died quickly. That was in broad daylight on a walkway in Bennington between a senior center and a bank. The person who did it was caught almost immediately with a bloody knife, and it was clear that about that, but his competency was in question, and he was in a mental health facility, in a correctional facility for a great deal of time. And some of S89 and 91 are written from our experiences in that case. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. So the first section of S89 provides a definition of a forensic facility to mean a residential facility licensed as a therapeutic community residence for an individual initially committed under 13 VSA 4822, which is insanity as a defense, persons with a mental illness whose need of treatment, or 4823, which is persons with an intellectual disability in need of treatment. Section 2 deals with involuntary treatment, updates the gender-neutral language, and adds a subsection that requires the Commissioner of Mental Health to specify in the application for involuntary treatment if the Commissioner seeks to have the person treated in a forensic facility, including why this placement is clinically appropriate and why treatment can be provided only in a forensic facility. That Section 3 has to do with hearings on application for involuntary treatment, adds a new subdivision allowing an applicant or a person for whom an order of non-hospitalization at a forensic facility is sought to file a motion for an expedited hearing. And it provides that the court shall grant an expedited motion if it finds the person demonstrates a significant risk of causing the person or others serious bodily injury and clinical interventions have failed to address the risk of harm to the person or others. The court may grant an expedited hearing if it finds that the person has received involuntary medication in the past 2 years, and based upon the person's response to the previous and ongoing treatment, there's good cause to believe that the additional time will not result in regaining competence. If the court grants an expedited hearing, it will occur within 3 days of the order, and the court may grant an extension to allow for psychiatric exam. Section 4 deals with orders of non-hospitalization, adds a new subdivision, A2, if the Commissioner of Mental Health determines that treatment at a forensic facility is appropriate and the court finds that it's the least restrictive setting adequate to meet the individual's needs, the court shall issue an order for non-hospitalization at a forensic facility for 90 days. The court may review the need for a treatment prior to the expiration of the order. Section 5 deals with the application for continued treatment and specifies that an application for continued treatment at a forensic facility must expressly state where the treatment is being sought and why the Commissioner of Mental Health has determined that clinically appropriate treatment for the individual condition can only be provided safely in a forensic facility. Mr. President, Section 6 deals with a hearing on application for continued treatment orders. Section 7 deals with applications for involuntary medication. It allows the Commissioner of Mental Health to seek involuntary medication for an individual refusing to accept psychiatric medication who has been placed under an order of non-hospitalization at a forensic facility or who has an application for involuntary treatment at a forensic facility pending, which the court has granted an expedited hearing. Section 8 deals with court findings and adds a new subsection. If the court finds that without an order for involuntary medication, there is a substantial probability that the individual would continue to refuse medication and as a result would pose a danger to harm to self or others, the court may order administration of the medication at a forensic facility for up to 90 days, or longer if needed. If the individual becomes competent, the order is no longer in effect. And you'll hear more about competency and insanity in S91. The findings, Section 9 deals with the findings and order. Persons with an intellectual disability. Specified that if an individual is committed to the Commissioner of Dale, that the placement must be in a designated program in the least restrictive environment consistent with the person's need for custody. It replaces language that cross-references sections repealed by this bill with a provision that judicial review procedures for an order issued under this section and for discharge from a commitment order must be in accordance with 18 VSA 8845, which is judicial review. Section 10 removes the definition of danger of harm in others and adds a definition of commissioner and person in need of continued custody, care, and habilitation. And also amends the term definition of a person in need of care and custody and habilitation. Section 11 is jurisdiction and venue. Section 12 has to do with petitions and procedures. Section 13 with hearings, and Section 14 findings and order. Sections 11 to 14 propose to repeal 18 VSA 8840 to 8843 as they are from without substance. Chapters 206, Chapters 1 and 2, which were repealed in 1995. And despite an apparent structure, Subchapter 3 does not provide an independent avenue for seeking civil commitment in the absence of Subchapters 1 and 2, and does not make sense to retain, so that's the reason for repeal. Section 15 has to do with legal competence, specifies that a determination that an individual is in need of continued custody, care, and habilitation does not lead to presumption of legal competence. Judicial review in Section 16 specifies that individuals committed to the custody of the Commissioner of Dale under 13 VSA 4823 may be discharged from custody after judicial review by a superior judge in accordance with the subchapter. Directs that at least 10 days prior to the effective date, any administrative order for discharge by the Commissioner, and that the Commissioner gives notice to the committing court and State's Attorney of the county where the prosecution occurred. Section 17 covers exclusions. Excludes a forensic facility supervised and operated by DMH and Dale from certificate of need requirements. And Section 18 provides for rulemaking. This is a very important section, Mr. President. And in the drafters of the bill, working with Legislative Counsel, we're really concerned, as I said earlier, about the use of a forensic facility for those who might not need it. And do you do it under the normal court process of letting judges decide, or do you do it through rule making, or just let the Department of Mental Health or Dale make the decision? And so Section 18 directs the Secretary of Human Services in consultation with DMH and Dale to initiate rulemaking by 7/1/23, specifying the criteria that the department shall use to determine admission to a forensic facility and the process used by commissioners to determine appropriate admissions. Admission criteria and processes must ensure that individuals are served in the least restrictive setting necessary. Individual treatment and programming needs dictate that the treatment and programming be provided in an intensive residential level in a forensic facility, and individuals only receive treatment and programming within a forensic facility if the individuals have demonstrated a significant risk of dangerous. It prohibits the departments from admitting residents to a forensic facility prior to the adoption of permanent rules. And then Section 19 provides for rulemaking, and Section 20 deals with the effective dates, which is 7/1/24, except Section 18 and 19, which take effect on passage. Mr. President, the vote of the Senate Judiciary Committee was 5-0-0. We heard from a number of witnesses, which I will not cite, but I want you to know that we really were very thorough in our work on this bill, and we urge the Senate to pass the bill.
Now you've heard the report of the Committee on Judiciary. The question is, shall the Senate adopt the report of the Committee on Judiciary? Are you ready? Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the reporter?
Senator from Bennington is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
I just wondered if you could clarify. It says the purpose is to establish a forensic facility, but in looking at the different sections, I know that we do have very, they're called micro facilities now that would provide secure settings for individuals who can't be adjudicated under Act 248, and they're operated by designated agencies. So is it envisioned at some point we would actually have established a forensic facility, which then would get into, I would gather, capital construction? So I'm just wanting to make sure that I understand what this bill will do and what it envisions.
Mr. President, that is a fantastic question, and one that I think will be answered when the Senate Health and Welfare offers its amendment to the bill, which I'll give away the secret. The Senate Judiciary Committee supports the Senate Health and Welfare Committee amendment, so I think I'd wait. But yes, it's considered one single forensic facility operated by the state of Vermont.
Thank you for the clarification. I await the Health and Welfare amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question is, shall the Senate adopt the report of the Committee on Judiciary? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Judiciary. It's my understanding there is now an amendment if the senator chooses to stand and offer an amendment. Otherwise, there isn't an amendment to be offered. The senator from Chittenden Southeast has an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to reinforce that this is a very important bill, and the Senate Health and Welfare Committee has considered the bill. We did not have the bill in our possession, and we thank Senate Judiciary and others for giving us time to consider the bill before it was presented on the floor. As you look at the proposal amendment, our committee is adding, and you'll see that the folks who are sponsoring this proposal amendment are all members of the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. We're adding, we're adding a purpose section in the bill, and the purpose section is to clarify what we mean by the forensic facility. So the initial forensic facility shall be located in the 9-bed unit of the current Vermont Psychiatric Care Hospital. So it'll be a place reserved for the programs and services that are included in the underlying bill. And the purpose section is to respond to questions such as those asked by the senator from Caledonia. Secondly, a second proposal amendment is simply to strike out an extra word, the, in the phrase, after the phrase, the court may. The third instance of amendment is to add in some reports back to us. As we listened about the bill, and we heard both from Department of Mental Health and from Dale. Our questions really led us to wanting to understand what kind of programming would be available for the different patients who would be in this facility. So the planning, the staffing, the programming, specialized training, and the type of staff members who would be available to support people who might have intellectual disabilities or autism, or folks who might have various mental health illnesses. And then this section 21 is a report to the first, section 20, I should simply say, it's a presentation that we'll be looking at from Dale and Disabilities, Aging and Independent Living, and Mental Health. And then the second report is a report on the forensic facility and how it is performing, the number of folks who are there, folks who are waitlisted to be in the facility, indicating whether or not it's sufficient, and then aggregated demographic data, and then the numbers and types of emergency involuntary procedures used at the facility. So, Mr. President, we did hear from a number of folks, mostly from our departments of mental health and disabilities, aging and independent living, and as well as Ledge Council. That is the proposal of amendment, and we thank the Senate Judiciary for responding to it.
The question is, shall the Senate amend S89 as offered by the senator from Chittenden, Southeast, and others? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have further amended S89 as offered by the senator from Chittenden, Southeast, and others. Question before the body is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've ordered third reading of S89. That now brings up S91. S91 was read for the first time, referred to Committee on Judiciary, which considered the same, and that when amended, the Judiciary Committee recommends the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S91, an act relating to competency to stand trial and insanity as a defense.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill. For the report from the Committee on Judiciary, the Senator from Bennington, Senator Sears.
Mr. President, I'm very happy to be here today to discuss S91, which has to do with the competency to stand trial and insanity as a defense. And we'll provide a section-by-section summary in a second, but I want to say that this is another important bill in advancing our treatment of those serious mental illnesses who are involved in the justice system. I think probably every community has a number of people who commit a number of crimes and are unable to provide the alternatives necessary to hold them in appropriate places. What S91 attempts to do is to decouple the issues of insanity and competence to stand trial. It also attempts to provide avenues for the victims, and I'll get into that in a second, and the victims' families, obviously. S91 contains several provisions related to the court proceedings that occur in criminal cases where there are issues concerning either the defendant's sanity at the time the offense was committed or the defendant's competency to stand trial for the offense. The main focus of the bill is to separate the initial psychiatric examination that must occur when the question of the defendant's sanity or competency has been raised. So it will be an examination of the defendant's competency to stand trial, not the defendant's sanity at the time of the offense. S91 separates the initial psychiatric examination for the insanity defense from the defendant's competency to stand trial because, while both concern a defendant's mental health status in connection with a criminal offense, the two concepts are very different. A defendant's competency to stand trial concerns that defendant's mental health status at the time of the trial. A defendant is incompetent to stand trial if they're unable to understand the criminal charges or unable to participate meaningfully in their own defense. A person found incompetent to stand trial can be recharged with a crime later after the person regains competency. The insanity defense, on the other hand, concerns the defendant's mental health status at the time the offense was committed. The person is not guilty by reason of insanity if, as the result of a mental illness, the person can either not understand that the conduct is criminal or cannot conform that conduct to the requirements of the law. It is a complete defense if a person is found not guilty by reason of insanity. The person is not guilty and cannot be charged with a crime again. Most importantly, it is a defense that must be raised by the defendant. A defendant who is incompetent lacks the capacity to decide whether to raise the insanity defense. And it's not unusual for a defendant to choose not to raise it for various reasons. Therefore, in order to decide whether to raise the insanity defense, the defendant must first be deemed competent to stand trial. I know that sounds counterintuitive and a little confusing, but the defendant who is insane is not competent. The defendant who is not competent is not able to raise that defense at the initial stages. Competency, in other words, is a threshold issue. And if a defendant's competency is called into question, then it must be established before the criminal proceedings can continue. However, the wording of the current statute permits the state, the defendant, or the court to request the initial psychiatric examination to evaluate both the defendant's competency and the defendant's sanity. Since competency must be established before a defendant can raise the insanity defense, S91 rewords the statute to make it clear that the initial examination may evaluate the defendant's competency, not the defendant's sanity at the time of the offense. The defendant is free to raise an insanity defense and obtain an evaluation for that purpose at any time after competency is established. Throughout the bill, you will see statutory language struck that relates to the initial psychiatric examination for sanity. Section 1 reflects the current practice and clarifies that defendants are responsible for hiring their own evaluators for the purpose of establishing sanity. Funding for the evaluations of indigent defendants is provided each year to the Office of Defender General, and Section 1 expressly provides that the state must pay for the evaluation of an indigent defendant, which is constitutionally required. Section 2 strikes the reference to sanity being part of the initial psychiatric evaluation, and as in Section 1, states that the party who requests the evaluation is responsible for the cost, provided the state must pay for the evaluation of an indigent defendant. Subsection B ensures the examiner is provided with necessary medical records to conduct the examination. Subsection 3 is a critical part of the bill. Vermont is the only state in the country, other than Rhode Island, that requires the initial examination to be conducted by a psychiatrist, which has resulted in long wait times and very long court backlogs. Subsection C addresses this problem by permitting the examination to be performed by a doctoral level psychologist with training in forensic psychology. The provision sunsets in 1 year, and during that year, the Justice Oversight Committee will study and report back on whether this new option should be kept, repealed, or expanded to include other mental health professionals, such as psychiatric nurse practitioners or psychiatric social workers. Section 3 adds several details about the contents of the motion for an evaluation, such as a requirement that the motion include the facts indicating incompetency on which the motion is based, and it be made after the moving party has met with or personally observed the defendants. Section 3 also provides that for a misdemeanor offense, the evaluation will be done on an outpatient basis unless the court makes findings on the record that there's good cause for an inpatient evaluation. Section 4 strikes additional references to sanity as being part of the initial psychiatric evaluation. Section 5 puts in statute a current practice by expressly providing that the defendant is presumed incompetent, has the burden of proving incompetency by a preponderance of the evidence, and cannot be tried for an offense if it's found to be, if he or she are found to be incompetent. Section 6 concerns the court hearing that existing law requires to determine whether a defendant is a danger to self or others. If the defendant has been found to be either insane at the time of the offense or incompetent to stand trial. If the person is found to be a danger, the court must order that person be committed to the Department of Mental Health for treatment or the Department of Aging and Independent Living if the person's incompetency or insanity is a result of that developmental disability. Section 6 provides that notwithstanding any other provision of law, the commitment order does not modify or vacate existing orders concerning conditions of relief or bail, which will remain in place unless they are expressly modified, provided the inpatient treatment is permitted if a person who is held without bail is found to be in need of it. Mr. President, this is a critical area that is modeled on a case from Bennington that I described earlier in my discussion on S89. That individual, an arrangement was made between the defense and the state. He's on a held without bail, but he's now in a psychiatric hospital. If he should be released from that hospital and found to be competent, he would still be held without bail because that's how this would work. Under current law, it's questionable, and that deal that was made in Bennington is codified in this bill, in this section. And I think it's good public policy, and I think it will help victims to resolve some of these cases, to know that the person, if they regain competency, or if they're released, there will at least be notice to the victims. Section 7 requires the Department of Mental Health and the Department of Disability and Aging and Independent Living to report on whether a plan for a competency restoration program should be adopted in Vermont. If a competency restoration plan is recommended, the report must include recommendations for best practices, changes to law necessary to establish the program, estimated costs, and a proposal for implementation. Section 8 is the Justice Oversight Committee, which I referenced earlier, that will study whether the new provision permitting the initial psychiatric evaluation to be conducted by a doctoral level forensic psychologist should be kept, repealed, or expanded. Finally, Mr. President, Section 9 provides the bill takes effect on July 1, 2023. Your Committee on Judiciary voted 5-0-0 to support S91, and we urge your support for the bill. I believe there's an amendment from the Health and Welfare Committee that will further clarify some of the study on competency. Thank you, Mr. President.
The question now is, shall the Senate adopt the report of the Committee on Judiciary? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have adopted the report of the Committee on Judiciary. Question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. The members of Senate Health and Welfare do have a proposal of amendment. It's not extensive. So in Section 7, the section relating to competency restoration program planning, we've added a phrase in the second line that asks both Dale and DMH to consult with other parties. We know that there are interested folks who have authoritative positions who may wish to weigh in on this, including the Vermont Disabilities Council, and there are others. So that we've added that language, so they will be consulting with others. In Section 8, where there's a review by the Justice Oversight Committee, we've added in language that other states would be reviewed as well as what's happening in our state. Competency restoration is not a simple task or a simple issue, so that first section is going to be difficult enough. The second section will allow for a review of current law on the examination and of competency and sanity. And one of the areas that we're particularly interested in is the use of forensic psychologists, doctoral level folks who might, or others who might participate in determining whether someone is competent to stand trial. So that report will be coming back, or recommendations coming back from Justice Oversight. And your Health and Welfare Committee felt it important that members of Health and Welfare, as well as House Health Care, with a jurisdiction of mental health, also participate in those discussions around competency evaluation. So we've added members of those committees into this section for up to 4 committee justice oversight meetings. Our committee feels very strongly that participating in the areas of mental health is critical as we go forward, and we look forward to working with Justice Oversight as well as the Judiciary Committee on this. We did take testimony from a number of folks, and I will again say, mostly from the Department of Mental Health and Department of Disabilities, Aging, and Independent Living, but also from the Chief Medical Officer, who happens to be a forensic psychiatrist from the Howard Center, and a few others. So thank you, Mr. President. That is our proposal of amendment.
The question is, shall S91 be further amended as offered by the Senator from Chittenden Southeast and others? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have further amended S91 as offered by the Senator from Chittenden Southeast and others. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of S91. It is my understanding that we'll be passing over S30, which brings next on our calendar agenda S32. S32 is read a first time and referred to the Committee on Government Operations, which reports that it is considered the same and that when amended, the bill ought to pass. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations that also recommends that when the bill is amended to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S32, an act relating to ranked choice voting for presidential primary elections.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill. For the report from the Committee on Government Operations, Senator from Chittenden Central, Senator Vyhovsky.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I speak to the strike-all amendment?
You may.
The strike-all amendment can be found on page 935 of today's calendar. Last week, I presented you a complex topic that on its face seemed to be simple. This week, I will do the opposite. I will offer you an often misunderstood and seemingly complex topic that once understood is actually quite simple. S32 is an act relating to ranked choice voting. Ranked choice voting is a system of voting that allows a voter to rank the candidates in order of preference. Sort of like if you've ever taken your child to get ice cream and you ask them what flavor they want and they say maple. And then you might ask, well, what if they don't have maple? And they say, blackberry is my second choice. This is ranked choice voting. Humans are innately capable and familiar with preference ranking. It does not mean the child gets to have both kinds of ice cream. It simply means they have a backup plan should their first choice not be available. Ranked choice voting really is as simple as ice cream. Red, blue, and purple states across the country are using ranked choice voting. Both Maine and Alaska use ranked choice voting in statewide elections for president, federal office, and state office holders. 6 states, Arkansas, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina, already use ranked choice voting for their military and overseas voters to allow them to participate in it if a runoff election is needed. And many states, towns, cities, and parties use ranked choice voting for their elections all over the world. In fact, the United States used ranked choice voting for many years until it seemed that it made things a little too democratic and people in power began to repeal it. Except in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where they never did, and they've always voted by ranked choice voting. Ranked choice is about better democracy. It's about making sure that every vote counts. In the 2020 Democratic presidential primary, over 6,800 votes, 4.3%, were not counted because of candidates dropping out of the race before Election Day. And in the 2016 Republican presidential primary, over 2,200 votes, 3.7%, faced the same fate. Ranked choice would have ensured that all of these votes were counted the way we want to count every vote. But the benefits of ranked choice voting go well beyond helping make sure that more votes are counted when cast for withdrawn candidates. Ranked choice voting creates more representative outcomes because it allows voters to have backup choices and mitigates vote splitting. It's well known that candidates with similar platforms, experiences, or demographic characteristics can split supporters and votes, potentially helping another more polarizing candidate take the lead. Meanwhile, candidates seen as long shots are pressured to drop out, limiting the field not based on voters' choices, but because of the limits of a single choice system. And when it comes time to mark the ballot, voters often feel forced to vote strategically rather than selecting the person that they like best or who best represents them. All of this increases the likelihood of a contested convention that leaves voters feeling even more disenchanted and the party more divided. Ranked choice voting would solve these key problems and empower voters with more choice and a stronger voice in their elections. And it ensures that we nominate or elect our leaders who have broad support. Furthermore, voters who use ranked choice voting in their city elections have cited more positive campaigning, helping to ameliorate toxic campaign tactics and mudslinging that can be common in elections. With ranked choice voting, candidates are competing not just for a first choice, but for the second or third choice votes from their opponent's supporters, which lessens the incentives to run negative campaigns. This bill has 3 parts. The first part of the bill will allow municipalities to opt in to ranked choice voting for their local elections without having to request a charter change from the legislature. They can do this by either a vote of their municipality's voters or a vote of the legislative body. Important to note that if the voters vote to enact ranked choice voting, the legislative body may not vote to repeal it. But if the legislative body votes to enact ranked choice voting, the voters may appeal it. This bill also creates a summer task force to help us hammer out the logistics of moving forward with ranked choice voting in state and federal elections in 2026. We heard as we took up this bill that the Secretary of State and the town clerks simply did not feel that they had had enough time and enough details or enough understanding about what would be needed to implement ranked choice for the 2024 presidential election. So this summer task force pushes out the date to 2026, and it tasks them to help answer these questions and let us know what will be needed. The task force is tasked to report on the education of voters, the training of town clerks, presiding officers, and election staff, election integrity, security, and transportation of ballots, the technological requirements in tabulators, hardware and software, the methodology of ranked choice voting systems, the canvassing of votes and the roles of canvassing committees, the post-election process and reporting, and any other items related to the design and implementation of a ranked choice voting system. They will have the assistance of the Ranked Choice Voting The Ranked Choice Voting Study Committee shall have administrative, technical, and legal assistance from the Vermont Office of Legislative Counsel and the Vermont Legislative Joint Fiscal Office. And the task force will be comprised of 2 current members of the House of Representatives, 2 current members of the Senate, 1 designee appointed by the Secretary of State, and 3 designees appointed by the Vermont Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Associations. The designees must be from different sized towns and villages from different regions of the state and must have at least 1 hand count town represented. We will also have a designee from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, a member of an organization focused on the conduct of elections, and a member of a different organization focused on the conduct of elections. The final thing this bill will do will implement ranked choice voting for the 2028 presidential primary. This act will take effect on passage, except Section 6, which is redesignation, and Section 7, which amends 17 VSA Chapter 57, Subchapter 1. Those shall take effect on January 1st, 2027. And the rulemaking, tally sheets, and summary and return sections shall take effect on January 1st, 2025. While I know that myself and others are disappointed that we were not able to get ranked choice voting in place for our 2024 presidential primary, what we heard loudly and clearly was it was simply not feasible given the tight time frame. This bill is a compromise that tiers and phases in ranked choice voting and was supported by the stakeholders that would have to make these changes, including the Secretary of State and the Vermont Clerks Association. It gives them the time they need, the logistics and mechanics they asked for so that we can move forward. We heard from a long list of witnesses. We heard from the Secretary of State in Maine, where they have ranked choice voting. We heard from Burlington citizens. We heard from the Vermont Public Interest Research Group. We heard from Terrence Carroll, who's the former Speaker of the House in Colorado. We heard from our own Secretary of State. We heard from Josh Daniels, who's the former county clerk and auditor in Utah County, Utah. We heard from multiple town clerks. Of course, we heard from our legislative council. We heard from the Director of Policy and General Counsel at the Ranked Choice Voting Research Center, the Vermont League of Women Voters, the Vermont Conservation Voters, the Government Affairs New England region at R Street, the senior manager of the Government Affairs New England region of R Street Institute, the city clerk in Burlington, where they recently ran their first two ranked choice book elections. We heard from Fair Vote, we heard from Represent Women, and we heard from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. The vote in your Government Operations Committee was 6-0-0, and we asked the body for its support. Thank you.
Now you've heard the report from the Committee on Government Operations. Hold on just a moment. There's a further report by the Committee on Appropriations to be offered. Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Appropriations reviewed S32 for any appropriations that were made in the bill, and we did find two. In Section 5, there's a $1,000 appropriation for the per diems for the Ranked Choice Voting Study Committee. The committee found that to be a de minimis amount and decided not to make an appropriate amendment to that section. But we did want to recommend an amendment by striking out Section 4. Section 4 you'll find on page 939. This is a section that makes a $100,000 appropriation to the Secretary of State to help towns that do decide to do ranked choice voting. As is our practice, we removed that section and we'll discuss that appropriation in the budget. So your Committee on Appropriations recommends the bill be amended favorably on a vote of 5-1-1.
The question is, shall the report of the Committee on Government Operations be amended as offered by the Committee on Appropriations? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the report of the Committee on Government Operations as offered by the Committee on Appropriations. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Government Operations as amended? Senator from Chittenden North.
Thank you, Mr. President. I never thought I would see this day. 17 years ago, I asked my town to change the way we vote because newer methods, as Senator Vyhovsky indicated, provide more fair outcomes and often, but not always, eliminate the spoiler. You'll recall that in Burlington, instant runoff voting was adopted in 2005. I proposed IRV for Essex in 2006 and was laughed out of the room. Therefore, I'm pleased to see states like ours coming around at last to more fair election outcomes through a switch to what is now called ranked choice voting. Same type of voting, different name. As you may be aware, ranked ballots can be counted in different ways. The unnamed ranked choice voting counting method presented in S32 is known as the hare method, as in the tortoise and the hare. Hare RCV is the method of tallying votes that led to problematic outcomes for the mayor's race in Burlington in March of 2009, and the US Senate race in Alaska last August. Both of those elections decided close three-way races, and hare eliminated the voters' preferred candidate, Montrol in Burlington and Begich in Alaska, which a different RCV counting method would not have. So, how we count these ballots is one potential problem with S32. The other potential problem I see is where we count the ballots. Right now, most ballots are counted locally and the tally sheets are posted at each polling place for observation. Then the numbers are transmitted to the Secretary of State for her to add up and declare who won. If S32 becomes law, RCV ballots would need to be taken to a central location to be tabulated. And that brings, for me, 4 issues to mind. 1, the transport of ballots from 252 towns to Montpelier will delay the reporting of the presidential primary results for days. 2, individual towns won't ever know how they voted because the outcomes are only announced in aggregate. 3, given workforce shortages, will the state find an adequate number of people to transport all those ballots? And 4, finally, security is a bit of a concern as hundreds of ballot bags would need to be tracked and kept under watch. Because of these how and where concerns, I could easily vote no this afternoon. However, I will instead vote yes on S32 to get this bill moving. And I will trust that the RCV study committee described in section 5 of this bill will take the time to understand that better RCV systems exist than the remote tallies using the hare method. Namely, counting the ballots locally, which is called precinct summability, and using a Condorcet counting method. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the presenter?
The senator from Chittenden Central is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just need a little clarification. This is what may happen in 2026. Is this opening, and I don't mean that in any bad way, but would this allow for our federal, election to Congress and other statewide offices use this process in 2026?
There's nothing in this bill that would immediately make anything happen in 2026, but what we tasked the study committee to do is to look at what it would take for statewide and federal elections in 2026, but we would have to go make further legislative change to actually make that change in 2026. What it does do is make the change for the presidential election in 2028.
And as well as the municipal, allowing municipalities to move in this direction if they so choose.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Government Operations as amended? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Government Operations as amended. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. When the vote is taken, I ask that it be taken by roll.
Senator from Chittenden Central requests that the vote be taken by roll. The question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to talk a little bit about the process that the committee used and all the people we heard from and all of the math that we did in our committee as related to the methodology that is used in the bill. And as the senator from Chittenden Central said in her report of the bill, what is in the bill is a unanimous agreement between the parties that would have to implement the ranked choice voting system for the state, including the Secretary of State's office, the Clerks Association, VLCT, and the major sort of voting rights organizations in the state. The committee looked at lots of different methods of doing RCV, and the one that is in the bill is the most widely used method in the world. It is the most common and it is the most easily understood and implemented. All of the work of the study committee would be to answer a lot of the questions about the logistics and the counting and how it would work on the ground level in our towns. For most of our towns, they have, or for many of our towns, they have tabulators that tabulate, and the tabulators that we use in the state of Vermont are tabulators that function for RCV and can automatically tabulate just like they can for other types of voting methods. For the hand count towns, as the senator who reported the bill mentioned, those are the towns where it's a little bit more challenging. And that is one of the main tasks that this task force would look at is basically the question of hand count towns and what we do about them. This is a problem and a question that the state of Maine has already addressed and has a lot of experience. And as the senator said, we heard from the Secretary of State in the state of Maine about their process and how they've worked through these issues. So given the longer timeline that we implemented or propose in the bill, there's plenty of time to work out the logistics, and the Secretary of State's office is ready and willing to work out the logistics with the study committee, with their staff, with the clerks, and with other entities in the country that have used ranked choice voting. So I just want to reemphasize the thoughtful timeline and process that was used to get to where we are on this bill. As many of you may remember, this bill started out with implementing ranked choice voting next year for next year's presidential primary, and we realized quickly that that was not going to be possible. So we took a step back and implemented this phased-in approach, and that's what we're proposing. And we are really confident that this will be a method that will work well for the state of Vermont, and we ask for your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question is, shall the bill be read a third time?
Roll call, please.
The roll call had already been requested. Senator from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I interrogate the reporter of the bill?
The senator from Chittenden Central is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I understand that this is something that people are to understand. I have to confess, though, that as I've read certain portions of it, I don't quite understand them. In particular, in section 2 of the bill, on page 937, under the ranked choice voting tabulation, and it's subparagraph 2B. And those are elections with multiple winners. And what I'm thinking about are the elections that we often have in the Senate for Senate races in Vermont, in which we have 2 seats in a Senate district. And we often have multiple candidates for those seats. We may have 2 Democrats, we may have 2 Republicans, we may have 2 progressives, and we may have an independent or 2. So if I were looking at what comes out of a ballot, we often have more people who are running than there are seats to be filled. So if I looked at candidates A, B, C, D, E, and F, total of 6 candidates, and the first one gets 10 votes, B gets 9 votes, C gets 8 votes, D gets 7 votes, E gets 6 votes, and F gets 5 votes. In other words, 1 less for each one of the people on the ballot. This says essentially that the active candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and the votes for the eliminated candidate, and it says the votes are transferred to each of the ballot's next ranked active candidate. How would that work in practice? What would happen here? Who gets the votes?
So if the last candidate is eliminated, their votes then get redistributed. So who gets the vote is going to be based on how they were ranked on someone's ballot.
Okay.
So if my first choice candidate is eliminated, and then in this instance with two candidates, my second and third choices get redistributed in that way, because my
Based on
first
who
choice
the
was
second
eliminated.
choice is.
Yes, so it's going to be dependent on how I've ranked my ballot, how they get redistributed.
All right. Each one would go to the next ballot choice of the individual voter. And then there'd be a retabulation of the place of the voters. And that will continue until when?
So in an instance where there were 2 seats, it would continue until there were 2 candidates that had reached the threshold. And in an instance where there were 3 open seats, it would continue until there were 3 candidates that had won the election.
Well, Mr. President, when we say won the election, you would continue the process until when? Until you have a majority of the votes, 50-50, if you will, overall, or is there some other point? How would you do that?
So the way that it is done is that it's, I mean, I'm trying to think of the math. I'm trying to think of how to explain the math here. We talked a lot about this, but it can, so in a 1-to-1 race, it continues until someone has 50% plus 1. When we start to get into these more complex multi-voter races, the math is going to break down dependent on the number of seats. So for instance, I'm in a 3-seat district, and someone can win with 24% of the vote because of how things are distributed, but that wouldn't happen in a 1-seat district. So the math is going to be dependent on the number of seats that are in that district and how it gets distributed. So I don't have all of the percentages memorized, but I can certainly work to get a more formalized answer for the different ways that could break out for you on
I'm thinking, Mr. President, in the example that I used, in which you have essentially 6 candidates in a 2-person Senate race, at what point will you stop the redistribution? Is it when you have a total of 50% of the vote for each of 2 candidates?
So that would stop the tabulation. If 2 candidates reach 50%, that would stop the tabulation. But again, I didn't memorize every possible scenario for multi-district races, but I'm happy to, if you'd like the scenario you have said where there's 6 candidates running for 2 seats to get that breakdown and bring you the math for that, I'm happy to do that on 3rd reading. Yeah. But I didn't memorize all of the different ways the math could work.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. The reason I asked the question, and I sincerely have a little difficulty in understanding the math, because this is a real world situation that we have here in Vermont in this body all the time. And it would be helpful not to have to look at the math to understand who won an election. I think of the voters who are trying to figure this out. Are they going to need a kind of a cheat sheet to figure out how it works depending upon who voted for whom and in what order and so on? It just seems very, very confusing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Orleans.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. In a lot of towns in Vermont, there's less than 1,000 voters, and every one of those small towns, I believe it's 1,000 where the cutoff is to have a tabulate. In the district that I personally run in, many of those are small towns. Most of Essex County are small towns. And if you talk about trying to get people, I mean, we encourage people to go vote. And you put this problem, which I see, and I've been going to vote since I was 21. I don't think I've ever missed an election, but you don't want to complicate people's voting habits. So, I mean, they only vote, every couple of years. Sometimes they miss, so it's 4 years. And then they walk in to vote, and it's all by hand. And here they're handed a ballot that impossible for them to understand how it all works. I would think that, you know, this study committee that a group that we're going to put together, I would think you'd put that together, get somebody from the League of Cities and Towns to work on the small communities that vote by hand, and you don't get their returns until 11 or 12 o'clock at night. You'd get some sort of an opinion back from them on, or set up a process so that they could vote easier. But, you know, I'm a little bit like the senator from Franklin. I don't understand ranked choice voting. Whenever I've gone to vote, I'm allowed one vote usually. And most people in small communities, that's the way it is. And this ranked choice and getting through all that, and the member from the Ag Committee that I don't know actually the right district that she is from, mentioned 3 or 4 problems with the bill as it's written. And I should think we as a Senate would want to work out these bugs in a bill before we present it to anybody. And here we are making choices on an issue that some of us still don't understand and have questions about.
Senator from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. President. In a time when we're just struggling to get people to go to the polls, and we're coming up with this, what I would say, a scheme at this point in time. It's a scheme because I don't understand it either. So anytime I don't understand something, I tend to call it a scheme. I just don't know why we're in such a rush to pass bills in this body when we haven't worked out all the details yet. It just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense that we would put something, we're just putting the cart before the horse. I just don't understand why the hurry, why the timeline. Okay, I get it. This is what you want, but why wouldn't we just work out the details, Mr. President, before we just vote this thing out of this Senate chamber? We have time to sit down. We want a study committee, and that would give time, as my colleague from Orleans has so rightfully mentioned, to give time to on these smaller communities to go in there and effectively explain. I think it's just going to be, I know in my communities, it's going to be a complete, utter disaster of these people trying to explain to these folks how this thing works. And because, you know, we still have flip phones up there in the kingdom a little bit. And I can't imagine trying to explain in a short amount of time how they're going to be able to go in there and fill a ballot out and not just totally screw it up. I just wish that the committee would have spent more time trying to work more on a study committee before we bring this forward for a vote to change something as important as voting, where we already struggle to get people to go to the polls as it is. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to make clear that this bill does not mandate that any town needs to move towards ranked choice voting. It is permissive language that allows municipalities to opt in to ranked choice voting. I also wanted to clarify that the study committee is looking at statewide and federal races, which in all instances in Vermont are only 1-seat races. So the multiple race aspect isn't a part of this particular bill. Thank you.
Senator from Essex.
Mr. President, can I interrogate the reporter of the bill, please?
Senator from Chittenden Central is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Mr. President, we had mentioned all the folks that came here and were very, very supportive of this ranked choice voting. Did the committee take any testimony, as it was mentioned by the reporter of the bill, that there was in their statements to preface what the bill was all about? Did the committee take any testimony from any communities or any states or any cities or towns that had tried ranked choice voting and then decided that didn't work for them?
I mean, we did take testimony from the city of Burlington that had used ranked choice voting and then stopped using ranked choice voting and then now has opted to use ranked choice voting again. We took testimony from the city clerk who was tasked to implement the ranked choice system ahead of when they anticipated because there was a special election, and the clerk testified that it was much easier than they anticipated, and that they really didn't have much time to do much voter outreach because it was on a much quicker time frame than they anticipated. And we also heard from the clerk that there were very few ballot errors, so which really indicated that people, in fact, very easily could comprehend the ballot without much education. And we took testimony from a resident of Burlington who is supportive of ranked choice voting, but wants us to consider what method of ranked choice voting we use. So that's the only community that I'm aware of. I mean, we didn't do a worldwide search of communities that maybe have used this and now don't. But we did hear from Burlington, which is the one community in Vermont that has wavered a little bit. Though currently the voter is very strongly supported. The charter change to move towards ranked choice voting for city council races 2 years ago, and again, very strongly supported the move towards ranked choice voting for mayoral races in this most recent city election. I am not sure if that fully answers the question.
So, Mr. President, we didn't take any testimony from anybody other than who was in favor of ranked choice voting. Is that correct?
I mean, we heard from the town clerks who have mixed feelings on ranked choice voting and who were in favor of slowing down to gather more information, which is what we have absolutely done. And we heard from people who have done pretty extensive research on ranked choice voting nationwide. But again, we were not able to find, nor did anyone present themselves that really wanted to testify in opposition.
So, Mr. President, if during this study period, all the way up to 2026 or 2028, and the public outcry is so big and they don't understand the process of ranked choice voting, is there any mechanisms in this bill to keep this from going forward?
Well, there's nothing in this bill that is going forward for 2026 without a report back to the legislature and legislative action. And the presidential primary in 2028, we are moving forward with that being by ranked choice voting, but there's nothing to stop a future legislature to taking action if they're concerned. I do want to share that the exit polls from voters in Burlington and voters in New York who had their mayoral election by ranked choice voting are incredibly positive, and most voters report that in fact they do not find the ballot or the process confusing.
I appreciate the senators telling about Burlington, but did anybody in Essex County, in Orleans County, in Caledonia County, in Washington County, and all the other counties other than Chittenden County, did any of these counties get a chance to come in to your committee and express to you whether they favored or did not favor ranked choice voting, Mr. President?
We heard from the Legislative Committee Chair of the Vermont Municipal Clerks and Treasurers Association, who is the town clerk in Barre, which is in Washington County. We also heard from the town clerk of Brattleboro. We also heard, I don't know where every one of these people lives, so I certainly can't say that where they live and what they spoke to. And we heard from the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, which speaks on behalf of all of our Vermont cities and towns. And again, this proposal in front of you is a unanimous agreement between the League of Cities and Towns, the clerks, and the Secretary of State's office. So we certainly didn't only hear from people in Chittenden County, and we also heard, as I said, from Maine, Colorado, and Utah, who all use ranked choice voting on some level. And we didn't know what they were necessarily going to come tell us, and we heard a variety of experiences and pitfalls and things to look out for and ways that things worked and didn't work. So I am confident that we can learn from these other states and that our study committee will do their due diligence to make sure that we have adequate get voter education in place. That is the very first thing they are tasked for, so that if municipalities are opting into this and when we move towards this at a larger level, people are well educated.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? Yes, Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
I just want to say I really appreciate the approach of this bill, and I'm going to vote in favor of it. And I just want to, I don't know if we do dittos on this floor, but I'd love to ditto the comments made by the senator from Chittenden North. There are different ways to do a ranked choice voting, and this HARE method, as articulated in the bill for the municipalities, has its shortfalls. And so I'm really optimistic that the research that the committee will be doing will take a close look at the Condorcet method, because precinct summability is a very important concept that we need to keep in mind to maintain confidence in our elections. So I appreciate the approach taken in this bill, and I look forward to voting yes for it.
Question 4 is Senator, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, the Secretary shall commence to call roll.
Senator Baru.
Yes.
Senator Bray.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
No.
Senator Campion.
Yes.
Senator Chittenden.
Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Collmore.
No.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Gulick.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Hashim.
Yes.
Senator Engel.
No.
Senator Kitchen.
Yes.
Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator McDonald.
Yes.
Senator Mazza.
Yes.
Senator McCormick.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
Yes.
Senator Pershling.
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Starr.
No.
Senator Bihovsky.
Yes.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
No.
Senator Westman.
No.
Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
No.
Senator Renner.
Yes.
Please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yea, 23. Those voting nay, 7. And you have ordered third reading of S32. We now have up for consideration S17, I believe. Oh, excuse me, S42. You are correct. My mistake. S42 was referred to the Committee on Government Operations, which considered the same and recommends that when the bill is amended ought to pass. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which also recommends that when amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S42, an act relating to divestment of state pension funds of investments in the fossil fuel industry.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill, and for the report of the Committee on Government Operations, the Senator from Windsor, Senator Clarkson.
Thank you, Mr. President. S42 is a win-win for our state, a win for Vermont and its pension funds, and a win for Vermont's environment. The bill before you, S42, which you can find on page 947 of today's calendar. And Mr. President, may I speak to the strike all amendment found in the calendar?
You may.
Thank you. The bill before you, S42, is the result of a very productive negotiation between the treasurer and his office, Third Act, an environmental group, VPIC, our Vermont Pensions Investment Commission, Tom Zenzillo, a national financial expert on pension funds and divestment, and the Senate Government Operations Committee. I want to begin by thanking everyone who has worked so hard to help craft this bill, which enables Vermont to take this step forward, this step towards divesting its pension funds of fossil fuels while protecting both the pension funds and the ADEC, the actuarially determined employer contributions. This bill proposes a phased-in approach to divestment. Maybe this afternoon's session is going to be called the phased-in session. Here are the three key elements of this bill. First, we're establishing a review of the pension funds so that by next February, we'll have a full picture of what fossil fuel divestments actually are in our pension funds and the ones we actually own. Second, we're establishing shorter and longer term goals for a divestment process. And third, we provide for the staff support to review and report on our investments and to help create VPIC's plan and to develop this work and to do this divestment work. It's important, it's so important to many of us that Vermont be consistent both in our policy and in our investments. We shouldn't be using state funds to support activities we're trying to phase out. Our Global Warming Solutions Act sets goals for reducing the state's carbon footprint through our emissions. However, our carbon footprint is also in our investments. And this bill puts us on the path to decarbonizing them as well. Last week's report from the United Nations said that if we are to meet the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, all new fossil fuel development must stop immediately. Divestment moves us towards supporting that goal by depriving the fossil fuel industry of the capital it needs to fund new fossil fuel developments. Vermont's pensions should not be invested in industries that are harming Vermonters by furthering global warming. With this bill, Vermont will be joining Maine, New York State, New York City, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Baltimore, Minnesota, San Mateo County, and Los Angeles in divesting from fossil fuels to help protect our climate. More than 71 countries and over 1,400 institutions have committed to divesting from their fossil fuel investments, representing over, hard to take this figure in, $39 trillion worth of assets. S42 represents another way for Vermonters to contribute less to the problem of global warming and climate change. In 3 sections, the bill does the following. It sets out our intent to have VPIC divest the pension funds of fossil fuel investments over the next 17 years. Again, phased in. It requires VPIC, in consultation with the Treasurer, to review, take an inventory of what the carbon footprint of the pension funds is, and report back to the legislature in February of next year. It requires VPIC to develop a plan to divest with a process that has benchmarks of 2030 and 2040. And it requires reporting back to the legislature every January until 2041 about their progress. It appropriates $100,000 to VPIC to support the work of the review and the report, and authorizes VPIC to use $127,000 of its own money, percents from each one of the funds, to finance the additional work of meeting the planning and reporting requirements of this act. And it sets an effective date upon passage. As Treasurer Pieciak testified, this bill addresses VPIC's concerns by making it clear that divestment is to take place only, and I'll say this again, only if it's financially prudent and consistent with sound fiduciary practice. While VPIC has not endorsed this final bill, they gave it extensive input. It addresses their concerns and identifies them as designing the divestment plan and driving many of the decisions. In sum, the bill gives VPIC flexibility in planning and implementing the divestment by leaving VPIC to define the definition of fossil fuel companies. Sorry. It creates exemptions for private investments and de minimis investment in fossil fuels defined as less than 2% of VPIC's total holdings. The bill sets a target date of divestment by 2030 for mutual and index funds, those are group funds, And for private investments, for private equity, the bill sets a goal of divestment by 2040. And again, only if VPIC determines that the exemption for private investments is not needed and divestment is consistent with sound fiduciary practice. The bill recognizes and builds on the excellent work VPIC has already been doing to decarbonize the pension funds and to participate in shareholder advocacy on environmental, social, and governance issues, which they have done, and they've done for the last 10 years. And we applaud their work on that, but we are asking for more. The bill will help protect pensioner savings because increasingly fossil fuels are a challenging investment with potential liabilities for all the companies. Clean energy, such as wind and solar, are now less expensive. Market forces favor these sustainable alternatives, and fossil fuel companies face the prospect of massive lawsuits, not unlike the tobacco or drug companies, for having caused so much environmental damage through climate change. Many studies have shown that divested funds perform the same or better than funds that have not divested. And divestment from fossil fuels is a sound fiduciary practice. A former teacher, we heard from many people, which I'll get to in a second, but a former teacher, what we might call a pensioner, also testified in our committee, and he said, "I'm convinced there is no conflict between divestment from fossil fuels and fiduciary responsibility. But for those pension holders and taxpayers who worry that divestment might negatively affect the state's pension investments, this bill provides an additional financial safeguard in that it specifically directs VPIC to divest in accordance with sound investment criteria and consistent with fiduciary obligations." I've started asking other pensioners how they feel about divestment, and they're relieved that the bill offers another chance at divestment because they have been wanting to see it happen for years. And when they heard that the bill stipulates divestment with fiduciary responsibility, they had no qualms about supporting it. I would like to think that the teaching I did was part of my legacy, but an even more important legacy would be to leave behind a world that is beginning to recover from the climate emergency. Divestment is a step toward that legacy. As environmentalist Bill McKibben said, Vermont, by divesting, will strike an important blow, both symbolic and practical, in the climate fight. It will protect pensioners' savings, but it will also help protect the planet on which all of us hope to retire. The bill strikes a livable balance between our goals to reduce fossil fuel investments and the way we can practically implement these goals without harming the pension funds we have worked so hard to shore up. We need to use everything in our power to slow climate change. Divestment is an additional tool we can use in our people and our planet. Divestment is a step toward our legacy. We heard from 15 witnesses, and there are a whole range from the deputy treasurer in the office of the state treasurer, from the state treasurer himself, from a retired teacher, from the director of financial literacy in the treasurer's office, from the executive director of the national education, from the NEA, from the chair of VPIC, from the investments manager in the office of treasurer, from the chief investment officer of VPIC, from the executive director of the Vermont State Employees Association, from a member of Third Act, from Bill McKibben, from the project manager of Employment Labor Retirement Program of the National Conference for State Legislatures, from, as I said, our treasurer himself, from the executive vice president of the Office of Finance and Administration from Middlebury College, from the Director of Financial Analysis for the Institute of Energy, Economics, and Financial Analysis, and from our own superb legislative counsel. Our committee vote was 6-0, and we ask for the Senate support in this important work. Thank you.
I've heard of the report from the Committee on Government Operations. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which consider the same. And for the report of the Committee on Appropriations, Senator from Washington, Senator Perschlik.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Appropriations reviewed S42 for impacts on expenditures of state funds, and we have 3 amendments that we're proposing. So the first instance of amendment you'll find page 950. So we're striking in section 1A, subsection A, which is just intent language, but we thought it was important to add some other language to the intent. We basically take that subsection A and break it into 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph would be added language. This adds the language, even though the reporter of the bill kind of mentioned this, the good work that VPIC has already done. They've already done some work trying to address the climate impacts of the pensions investments. So we wanted to mention that and have them continue that good work. The second paragraph is kind of what the most important part of our amendment here is that we wanted to make sure that under the kind of definition of what sound fiduciary practices, that consideration be made on what the impact might be of the ADEC and administrative costs. Since that wasn't mentioned in the underlying bill, we wanted to make sure that when they're looking at the impacts of the divestments, that they're looking at any negative impact or expected increase to the ADEC or administrative costs. So we added that in there. And then the third paragraph is really just the last paragraph of the section we deleted. So that's existing language. So that's the first instance of amendment. The second instance of amendment is striking another sentence, so striking another paragraph in section 1, section D, subsection 1 on page 951, where the part we're striking, if you want to look in the underlying bills, on page 948. But basically, this is the section D1 is the section that tells VPIC to develop a plan. And so we wanted to add a sentence in there, a clause in there that mentions the administrative costs and any negative impact on the ADEC be part of that plan. So even though we're striking the whole paragraph, the only difference between the 2 paragraphs, like the dates are the same about when we're trying to reach divestment, all that's the same, but we added in the clause that after fiduciary obligations, this language that says including consideration of any expected increased funding requirements for the actually determined employer contribution, ADEC, and administrative costs. So that's the second instance of amendment. The third on page 951 is striking section 2 on page 949. And this is more of a straight appropriations amendment where there was $100,000 appropriated to VPEC to develop the plan and to review the whole portfolio, because part of what VPEC has to do is look at all their investments and see where there is these fossil fuel investments. So that appropriation, $100,000, is pulled out. We will look at that when we look at the whole budget. Even though we struck the whole section, the second part of that section, that language is identical because that is an appropriation, but that appropriation to VPEC comes out of the pension funds themselves and isn't state funds. So we left that in there. And with that, the committee voted it favorably out with a vote of 6-0-1.
So a question, Senator from Government Operations, from Windsor.
Thank you. Senate Government Operations heard the appropriate amendment, and we approved it with a unanimous vote. Thank you. And appreciate their work.
Question is, shall the report of the Committee on Government Operations be amended as offered by the Committee on Appropriations? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have amended the report of the Committee on Government Operations as offered by the Committee on Appropriations. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Government Operations? Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wonder if I might interrogate the reporter from the Government Operations Committee.
The senator from Windsor is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
as someone who wants to see divestment actually happen, I find myself looking for ways that it might not. So I'm looking at language on page 947, which I understand has just been replaced, but the language that I have a question about appears in both the appropriations amendment and the original amendment, and that is on 947, it says it is the intent of the General Assembly that honor before the date the Vermont Pension Investment Commission consistent with sound fiduciary practice and subject to any exceptions. And I'm wondering about that phrase, subject to any exceptions. What does that refer to? Who might make such exceptions, and can you give us an example, Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. President. The exceptions that we discussed that are important for VPIC 2, there may be private equity, there may be some investments that they want to have and need to be excluded. And if I could just have 1 second to confirm with Legislative Counsel that's sitting right behind me to make sure that I'm on the right track in answering this.
The Senate will take a brief recess till the fall again.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The Senate will now come to order. I just to make sure the recordings are accurate. Senator from Windsor.
Thank you. I'm reminded that one of the reasons we added the intent section was to underscore that this, our long-term purpose and the exemptions in the plan and the exceptions for the plan are found on page 948 under 2 exemptions. And we did this at VPIC's request in large measure, and this was part of the negotiation, was the de minimis amount that was established. So I'm just going to read them to you because our counsel's writing is better than my extemporizing. The exemptions are until such time as the commission deems divestment to be prudent and consistent with sound fiduciary practice. The following holdings are exempt from the plan. A de minimis, again, 2% or less, exposure of any funds held by the commission to stock, securities, and other obligations of any fossil fuel company or any subsidiary, affiliate, or parent of any fossil fuel company, and private investments that contain fossil fuel company stocks, securities, or other obligations of any fossil fuel company. The reason and then we give them 10 more years to 2040 to fully divest. The intent is obviously for long-term divestment. We've given them additional 10 years with these more challenging private equity funds, which often are harder to unwind in terms of their investments in various things, in various industries, including the fossil fuel industry. So we're giving them that additional extra 10 years, and we are giving them a de minimis amount that they are able to continue to hold.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I'm understanding the senator correctly, when it says exceptions in the intent language, it means exemptions.
They are the same.
I would suggest, Mr. President, that we just use the same word. Exceptions and exemptions as defined are not the same. So I would suggest before third reading that we change that, because as it stands now, Section 1, paragraph A says subject to any exceptions, which is just fundamentally a different thing from the exemptions listed later in the bill. So my other question, Mr. President, is consistent with sound fiduciary practice, would it be possible for VPIC to decide not to divest because they don't think it's sound fiduciary practice?
We would need to, I think, in all fairness, they have already done a lot of this work, both in their engagement with companies that and funds that hold fossil fuel investments, and with their private equity. They've already begun this process, as has the rest of the financial world. I would say that they report back every January, and I think, and they will be making progress, we hope, and we will certainly have I think that question has to be answered after we have a notion of how fully we're invested in the fossil fuel industry. I think we will know that more fully by next February. And I think that question we will be asking, and that will be the interesting challenge, is how we continue to push forward on this, and how they respond, and what the scale of the problem is. So I think in some ways we'll be able to answer that more fully as of next February. I think it is the intent, that is part of why we have put the intent in the beginning of the bill, which is, it is the intent that our value is that we fully divest by 2041. And we are authorizing VPIC to create the plan and the process for doing so. But that is our objective.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank the senator. As I say, I personally would like to see this divestment happen, and I take the point that VPIC has already begun to think out this process. I'm just hoping it doesn't result in a long analysis and discussion, the end of which is VPIC saying it wouldn't be sound fiduciary practice. But thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too am slightly concerned that this is not getting us, or I am concerned it's not getting us anywhere very quickly. And may I inquire of the presenter?
The senator from Windsor is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. It seems to me, reading through this, a lot of this is aspirational with intents, not much in terms of shalls, except for studies, and then nothing. It's possible very little could happen until 2041. Can you just make me feel a little bit better that this has some real teeth behind it, in it?
Yes, I would remind the senator that we have been asking for divestment from our portfolio since about 2012. I think I was on the first bill in the House. I think that we are standing before you discussing this and having this conversation with VPIC and our unions who are represented in these pension funds. Is really exciting. And I think with all things, it's a balancing act, and we are balancing the health and sustainability and possible liabilities in our pension funds with trying to ensure that our planet survives. And we are trying to balance two ends pulling at us, and we are trying to move forward. So this was a way we could thread the needle, move forward together, begin the work of divestment in a way that was sound, thoughtful, that didn't frighten our pensioners, and that really brought people along. For the first time in 12 years, 11 years, we have the treasurer supporting this bill and this work. And that support in many ways hinges on the phased-in approach with which we are going forward. So I would encourage us all to support this step forward, which is such a big improvement over the last several years.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I do agree that we're certainly moving in a good direction. It's I think my own personal frustration, not with this bill, that we are taking so many baby steps. 2040, 2030 is a long ways away. I again appreciate the committee's work, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Rutland.
Mr. President, may I inquire of the reporter of the bill?
Senator from Windsor, turning as the reporter of the bill.
Mr. President, I believe the senator from Windsor indicated that VPIC opposed this bill from your report. Is that correct?
Opposed is a strong word. They were very involved in our work, and I think they will work with us. They provided valuable input, and the bill is crafted to address all of their concerns. It is a puzzlement to me and to my committee, I believe, that we lost their support near the end. But I will read you their statement. VPIC supports the spirit of the bill and our efforts to address climate change in our behavior as a commission. However, and this is the last day we're doing this, so they pulled out sort of at the last minute. However, we oppose it as written based on our fiduciary duty to maximize returns for the underlying retirement boards and the cost charged back to the underlying retirement boards, lacking a full and comprehensive study conducted in advance before putting any policy positions or taking any investment actions. And this bill, as you know, tries to lay out what is our exposure. We will know by next February what we're exactly invested in. Right now, we don't know. And so I think that they will feel more confident. I think we'll all feel more confident going forward once we know what the scale of the problem is.
Mr. President, point taken on my use of the verb oppose, perhaps. It didn't sound like they were in full support either. What you just read was true. Did they give you any idea, the VPIC, the commission, what divestment from fossil fuels might cost the pension funds?
We do not have that figure yet. Again, I think we will know a lot more, and they have already begun to do so. So, I mean, there is already, we will find out more by next February, and we did not address that issue, and I know that we can begin to speculate about it, but I don't think we know until we know the scale of the problem. I don't know that we really have an answer to that question.
I thank the senator. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to reiterate some of the things that the senator from Windsor said, and also address some of the concerns that the senator from Bennington raised about the timeline. I think there were a number of us on the committee that wish we could do this faster, and I appreciate that there are many of us in the chamber that want to see this happen more quickly. We took testimony from some entities that had divested, namely Middlebury College, and heard about their timeline as to how they are in the process of divesting their endowment. And there are some specific differences between an endowment and a pension fund, namely in the types of funds that are usually involved. And the majority of the funds that are part of a pension fund are more difficult to divest because they are often and now I'm blanking on the word, entangled funds that have to be sort of pulled apart. And I will think of this word, I'm sure, as soon as I sit down. But the other thing is for the private investments, those often have a long-term tail on them, a contract that can last 15 to 20 years. And so if we are in a private investment right now, we have to wait for that contract to end before we can divest from those funds, because if we pull out of a contract, that actually costs us money. So in the way to divest, the 2040 date is really to help us get through those contracts. The bulk of the funds in the pensions are in the type of fund whose name I'm forgetting. Mutual funds? Yes.
Index.
Index funds, thank you. Sorry. Index funds, thank you. Those funds still have to be disentangled and will take time, but can be done probably by 2030. So the bulk of the divestment could happen by 2030, and we'll have reports along the way that will help us to determine those divestments. And so I just wanted to help people understand the timeline and why it is spread out so much. And the report backs will give us the assurity that it's happening. Again, we heard from the plan that Middlebury College has, and that is how they've divested their funds in this sort of step-by-step way, depending on the type of fund that's invested. Thank you for indulging my forgetting the word, Mr. President. Thank you.
I don't know that I had much choice. But I think we all know that, and I certainly have forgotten words myself, so no problem. The question is, Senator from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was struck when I first read this bill and the amendment, the constant repetition of sound financial practice, sound fiduciary practice, in accordance with sound investment criteria, sound fiduciary practice, sound investment criteria, consistent with sound fiduciary practice. Sound as if whoever wrote this had to continually convince themselves that such a thing was going on. Because I've always thought of sound fiduciary practice is being responsible for ensuring the greatest return to the beneficiaries of that fund or instrument or pension, invested in whatever makes sense from an investment standpoint that is legal to invest in. I've never seen anything, certainly in my training otherwise, about sound fiduciary practice in which that fiduciary practice is dictated by a group of politicians based on their political philosophy and ideas and interests and viewpoint. This is an issue that obviously has come up with many companies, and many organizations deal with it differently. One of them, for example, recognizes that many of the fossil fuel companies are in fact on the leading edge of how to deal with fossil fuels, because they're going to be out of business if they don't have a solution down the road. And one of the positions that many organizations have taken is to ensure that if there are such instruments in their portfolio that they can participate in, that they can in fact participate in them, so that they are helping to guide those institutions in what they do and how they manage their businesses, again, for the greatest return. Many organizations that use mutual funds, for example, allow their retirees to decide for themselves what portion of my retirement should be in a particular fund. This is often certainly the truth in 401ks and the like, that I can invest in a fund that is a divested fund, but I can otherwise divest in return in a fund that is focused on getting the greatest return on the other hand. I'm just very concerned that we have thousands of retirees, teachers, and state employees and others, that we're making investment decisions based on a political agenda. And I don't think that's the right thing to do for the protection of our retirees. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Government Operations as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by... Did you want to speak, Senator, from... The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Government Operations as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Government Operations as amended. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
Nay.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it, and you have ordered third reading of S 42. Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. As senators can see, we're at 3 o'clock. I have promised the afternoon committees, especially the money committees, that we would break off after a 2-hour session. I thank everybody for their work today, and that leaves us quite a bit to accomplish the next few days, but it's important that we continue the work of the Finance and Appropriations Committees. With that said, pending further announcements, I would move that the Senate stand in adjournment until Thursday, March 31st at 1 p.m.
Now, the senator from Chittenden Central has moved that pending announcement, Senate stand adjournment until Thursday, March 30th at 1 p.m. Are there any announcements? Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Natural Resources and Energy will meet tomorrow morning at 8:30.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance will meet at the fall of the gavel.
Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Education will meet 10 minutes after the fall of the gavel.
Senator from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate institutions will meet 15 minutes after the fall of gavel, please.
Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. GovOps will meet at 3:15. Thank you.
Senator from Windsor.
So, I encourage you to come and shake off your crossover blues at Farmers Night tonight at 7:30. The wonderful Jerry Grimo and his East Bay Jazz Ensemble are going to be playing, and they are just terrific. They play everything from big swing music to R&B. They're just wonderful, and I encourage you to come and delight in their work tonight at 7:30.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, the senator from Chittenden Central has moved that the Senate now stand adjourned until 1 p.m. Thursday, March 30th. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the Senate will stand adjourned until Thursday, March 30th at 1 p.m.